This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Maverick!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. Welcome into episode number 116 here on the Huskies Warming House Podcast. It is late in our Saturday evening, and we are pushing the threshold of, what late actually is. If you're wondering who we are the Huskies Warming House Podcast. I'm Noah Grant, and Nick Maxon is joining me just after 11 o'clock and an absolute ass-kicking from the Colorado Avalanche over Tampa Bay. Nick, I know that you picked Tampa to get through the conference finals. You were right on that one, but it's not looking so hot for the squad in blue so far.
No, game one could have gone either way. Get some good in-game adjustments, and then again, just you do the right thing by blocking a shot, ends up going to a Colorado stick, makes one pass, and Vasilevsky's caught in between. So a decent game one. Game two, no.
Well, let's hope this episode goes better than that. We are going to talk about the Stanley Cup final through the first two games, as we are going to get right into the heart of it coming up in the main portion of the show. We're also going to talk a little bit about some coaching vacancies, some teams that have roles to be filled. One of these is actually close to being signed, actually, since we created some of the notes for this show. So we'll talk everything related to the coaching vacancies around the National Hockey League. And then our extra ice session. Who are the most attractive free agents in the National Hockey League? And now with Shea Weber on the move, what does that mean for Kevin Fiala? Is there any
Shea
update?
Weber's contract is on the move.
Well, Shea Weber is connected to his contract technically. I mean,
we'll
talk about it. We're worried about him being just connected to his appendages at this point.
Right.
But nonetheless, we also do have a very quick Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. We do have a couple of signings as well as a couple of trades and some more Hockey Canada updates. So let's get to it without further ado. As usual, the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup and Center Ice View news and notes. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
As you mentioned, Noah here, Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, continuing to follow the news with Hockey Canada, again, stemming back to the sexual assault back from 2018. And it appears that more pressure is being placed on some members of Hockey Canada to actually come testify about the case. Canadian Heritage Standing Committee agreed Monday for Hockey Canada officials to testify about an out-of-court settlement of a sexual assault lawsuit, again, as we mentioned before. And as we talked about this before, Noah, one thing that really drove me nuts about this was the non-disclosure agreement, and this is exactly what they want to hear Hockey Canada talk about. So who is involved in this, right? So we have Hockey Canada CEO Scott Smith, former CEO Tom Rennie, who's also been a head coach in his tenure, Edmonton Oilers, former head coach, former senior VP of Insurance and Risk Management, Glenn McCurdy. You would think that somebody with that kind of title would have maybe been more involved in this, but we'll digress from that. Foundation Chair David Andrews, and among those being asked to testify in Ottawa on June 20th, per Rick Westhead again, Rick Westhead of TSN, always on top of these sort of things. Really did a great job with the mess in Chicago. Is again on top of this one, again involving Hockey Canada. Now, they do have the option to decline this invitation. If they don't respond or decline to testify, they'll be summoned to do so, MP Peter Julian said. So in other words, some pressure coming from those in government to really hear why this happened the way it did. Now, I think this is I think we have to set the tone here, right, Noah? So as we mentioned before, I think the first time we talked about this with the non-disclosure agreement, it doesn't appear, at least from the government and what they're saying, is that it doesn't sound like they're going to be opening up Pandora's box here, and we're going to learn maybe more about the incident, but it does seem like they're trying to understand why a non-disclosure agreement was pushed. And it's been my query since we first talked about it, and I'm curious as to your reaction from this latest development on this issue back from 2018.
Well, unlike the Arizona Coyotes, this is a case where you can definitively say progress is actually progress in this particular instance. Yes, Coyotes fans, I went there again, but it is a step in the right direction. And if anything, we're going to get a little bit more clarity on the situation, because unlike the Coyotes, this is a situation where we as the general public are not privy to a whole lot that is going on beyond what has been obviously stated in the media here. So, it is a step in the right direction. Will we ever get to that point where we are going to figure out who those 8 names are? I don't know. I also don't know, as far as the legal system goes, if you can legally rescind an NDA. I wonder if that has to come from both parties. I'm assuming
it would have to come from both parties, yes.
Yeah, or something along that lines in a clause where legally it makes sense to do something like that. I don't know that we're ever going to get to that point.
I don't think so, because normally, not to butt in, Noah, but normally when you sign it, I mean, you are, like you mentioned, the first time we talked about it, there was, there is an appetite for the victim to maybe sign something like this, because the victim typically wants to be out of the limelight, not to be, unfortunately, spotlight, and not the best way, and I'm not sure how else to phrase that really any better. So apologies on the words. It is late night.
At no fault of her own is basically
right. Exactly.
It's just, it's a poor situation. And, I think it's interesting, and this goes back to, we've seen this when victims of any type of assault do come out, they are worried about the backlash. And I think as a precedent moving forward, we obviously don't want anyone to end up in a situation like this. But if you are in a situation like this, I can say that, especially with big name people involved in something like this, that not signing an NDA and finding out who those people are is actually going to put the pressure on the people that ultimately should be held responsible for this. And that's an important step. But as you kind of mentioned, we're kind of more looking at the financial piece and why was this NDA signed, and also how was this situation handled by Hockey Canada, and moreover, did it use public funds to go through this too? So a lot of things up in the air, but I think steps in the right direction.
Yeah, we'll have to keep our eyes on it. Now, in response to this summons, right, Hockey Canada did also release a statement saying that, quote, we can say definitively that no government funds were used in the recent settlement of the lawsuit, end quote. No, also Canada Sport Minister Pascal Saint-Onge has also ordered an audit of the entity's financial activity, just to ensure or determine, I should say, whether any of those funds were used. Again, not taking at anybody's word. And again, we'll have to just continue to follow the story. Again, not great, of course, at face value, but I am intrigued as to what we may find out about this, and more so if Canada does anything to sort of address this for anything in the future. I would think that maybe their only real avenue would be if indeed public funds were used, because again, you can't deny the legal process from somebody if they want to sign an NDA, because again, as you mentioned, there's both the victim as well as the suspects or the perpetrator, however you want to deem that person to be. So again, interesting story. We'll have to keep following it, but definitely progress.
It goes back to the principle that we've talked about for the past couple of years, though, is that Hockey Canada, the people within Hockey Canada, and the precedent that Hockey Canada sets for young hockey players, coaches, fans, parents alike, has to be better when we go through some of these things. But we're going to find out, like you mentioned, June 20th, that's coming up on Monday. So we're going to have some answers hopefully soon.
Correct. Speaking of answers, we have at least one answer on what Las Vegas, the Golden Knights, are trying to do to try to fix, or at least put a band-aid on their not great cap situation, as they traded for defenseman Shea Weber to Vegas for forward Evgeny Dadonov. Now, credit to the Anaheim Ducks Twitter handle, where after this was released, because mind you, I believe Vegas was trying to send Dadonov to Anaheim, I recall, for a trade deadline acquisition, and because of a technicality, it fell through. And very quick on the dot, they just responded on Twitter, "You sure?" Yes, they are sure. That was well. That had me laughing pretty hard. That was very well played. So yes, Dadonov goes over to Montreal, 43 points in 78 games. 1 year left on a $5 million deal for the now Montreal Canadiens. This is a great pickup for Montreal, and I want to go to the point that that was brought up in the Steve Dangle podcast too, Noah, about this trade, and that was Kent Hughes, the GM of Montreal, was asked, why he would make this deal. And he essentially said, and this opens up an LTIR conversation that we'll probably have to have again in the future, but basically saying, I would not make this deal if Shea Weber was ever going to play again.
Yeah. Did you beat me to my own punchline on the show that I listened to? I like that. That's awesome.
Yes. And it's a fantastic question, because again, there's so much talk about LTIR, and it's funny because I think for Minnesota Wild fans, I've mentioned this before, the Minnesota Wild were rumored to be in on the contract for Shea Weber at the trade deadline as well. They did not like the return that was being that they was wanted in return.
And now the price is much too high. Yes. So the Wild are going to be in a position where they're going to have to maybe, I don't want to say circumvent the cap, but play within the rules that appear to circumvent the cap, even though everything that everybody has done has been within the league rules. But Shea Weber's contract, even though you say his body's attached to his contract, he will never be moving to Vegas, gives them, I believe, an additional $5 million in cap space to play with. Vegas, a lot of roster reconstruction, and also a new head coach there, Noah Grant. So a lot of things changing down there in the desert of Las Vegas. I actually think it's 7.2 million that they gained. Maybe
is it 7.2?
Even maybe even closer to 7.8, if I remember correctly. It's a fair amount of cap space, and it's interesting. Shea Weber's contract, as the Steve Dangle podcast had alluded to, was an oddly backloaded and front-loaded contract. It's a weird mix where David Poile signed him to a 14-year deal when he had to match.
It was matched.
The offer sheet for the Philadelphia Flyers. And ironically,
it wasn't Chuck Fletcher who offered the deal.
Yeah, we're gonna get to him. In a second. And oddly enough, as the podcast also alluded to, Dadonov, 43 points in 78 games, like you said, 16 points in the last 16 games since he was not actually dealt to the trade deadline. So, all in all, as long as Shea Weber doesn't wear an NHL uniform again, a great pickup for Montreal, and a pretty savvy move, I think, for the Habs, who desperately need a little bit of a boost from a guy who could easily be a 20-goal scorer on this squad. But
unloading dead cap for them as well. So for Montreal, a fantastic deal to be struck, and you help out maybe a little bit to Vegas, even though, again, as you mentioned, still a lot of reconstruction that has to be done. But I think good for both teams.
Yeah, and Anaheim was on the no trade list for Dadonov, so that's what held that piece up.
That's what it was, yeah.
And Montreal.
You sure? Oh, geez, that's cool.
the mecca of hockey was definitely on the destination for the former Vegas Golden Knights forward. Speaking of the Knights, they did get probably their biggest offseason acquisition splash so far. Adding their new bench boss and Bruce Cassidy coming over from the Bruins after his firing. The 57-year-old reported 5-year deal at $4.5 million per season. It's interesting because, dare I say, and we're going to talk about another coaching hire too, dare I say, Bruce Cassidy in Vegas, he's going to do a great job. He's a great coach.
Right.
It almost doesn't seem right. And the reason I say that is because he did such a good job in Boston. I think he was well loved by a lot of the fans in Boston, which in the city of Boston or in the New England area is more easier said than done.
Not in the locker room.
Yeah, I guess. But,
apparently being the key word.
Yeah, Vegas has got their own set of problems that Bruce Cassidy, maybe his rhythm of how he does things, maybe might not mesh so well with the management piece. But again, he's a straight shooter, so maybe that's exactly what the Golden Knights need. It's just weird to not see him behind the bench of a team that far on the West Coast, and a team like Vegas, who in the few years of their existence has had some tumultuous ups and downs as far as some of the offseason pieces that has gone on. But regardless of that, a great winning pedigree and a great pickup for the Knights just on on paper.
Yeah, on paper, great pickup. And again, it wasn't long. I think he said that, it would took almost 24 hours and then his phone was ringing off the hook. And I think as a coach, Vegas is an attractive place to play with some of the offensive talent that you have to work with. You have some glaring holes, especially between the pipes. But I think there is a great opportunity to really coach for, I think, a community in Vegas that I can't believe I'm saying this is a hockey hotbed. Yeah. Vegas has really embraced that hockey team down there, and they are all love for that squad. So
the only problem is Vegas isn't all love for their own squad.
Correct. So, and again, a lot of great talent up front. We know Jack Eichel, Max Pacioretty, Jonathan Marchessault, just to name a few, Mark Stone. And again, this team decimated by injuries, probably should have made the playoffs, but really kind of fell apart late. Pete DeBoer was given the axe after such failures because it really was their race to lose, I think. But in the last couple of weeks, they really just couldn't seal the deal. They lost a couple of close games. That loss that I attended to against San Jose, I think, was the nail in the coffin for that squad's playoff chances. So I admire the aggressiveness also of Vegas and their front office to, again, after an expansion draft that was heavily wavered in their favor, but they haven't stopped making moves. Again, acquiring Mark Stone, acquiring Max Pacioretty, acquiring Jack Eichel, Shea Theodore, Marc-Andre Fleury is one of their guys.
Alex
right? Alex Pietrangelo. So at the end of it, this team has not been afraid to make big splashes. I admire that because they really are trying to win a Stanley Cup. And it sounds like they're trying to be as creative as possible to do so. So it's been fun to watch, but it's almost like, every good deed does not go unpunished. And you kind of wonder if some of the seesaw is being weighted in the opposite direction for Vegas. So we'll see.
Yeah, what happens in Vegas doesn't always stay in Vegas. Just ask Gerard Gallant.
It gets shipped off to Buffalo for picks anyway. So.
Oh boy! Speaking of kitty corner to Buffalo, and giving away assets for no particular reason, the Philadelphia Flyers did get their coaching hire nailed down. And questions.
Oh boy.
John Tortorella, 23rd coach in team history, 4 years at $4 million per year. And
Jesus.
And I think at its base, and I think in the right market, John Tortorella still has value. My question is,
that's probably the only market he's got value, to be honest with you.
I say, my question is, do the Philadelphia Flyers need a hard ass, or do they need a motivator within other avenues? And John Tortorella's motivation is he scares you into submission, essentially, to play the style that he wants you to play. For some players, that's exactly the boost they need. They need that structure. They need somebody on them that has that accountability beyond there. Other players need a free-flowing style that works well for them. This has the potential to be an okay Chuck Fletcher move, or it has the potential to blow up in his face and have a buyout with a couple of years remaining on this deal, Nick.
Brooksy, if I wanted to explain it to you, I would. This is a very high risk move by Chuck Fletcher, as you mentioned. With the departure of Alain Vigneault, and again, there was, warning signs of, ripping at the seams with him under the helm. It never was recovered under Mike Gill. And as much respect as I have for Mike Gill, as I know him personally as a person and as a coach, as a coach that knows the game, he's had his struggles with the NHL level in head coaching. And again, it's an art form. And you kind of wonder, and I think you set the table perfectly, Noah, that is, what does this team need? Does this team need someone that's going to essentially gather the sheep and put them in line effectively without, a really better way to say it? Or do they need someone that's going to be a hybrid like a Dean Evison, where, he does hold his players accountable, but also can, crack a joke and be approachable.
Yeah. And almost step back and let the players handle what's needed to be handled.
Correct.
And you talked about Mike Yeo, and Mike Yeo, we've talked about it so much in this podcast, was never a player's coach. John Tortorella is also not a player's coach, but not in the same vein. Mike Yeo just never really found the route in which to be a player's coach. John Tortorella's stance is, he's the Herb Brooks of the NHL. Yeah. I'll be your coach. I won't be your friend,
Yeah.
And we're going to find out if that avenue of Philadelphia not having a player's coach is going to be an effective one under the new regime, or if it's going to be their demise.
And it's a very important part for this franchise. Again, horrible season. Number one, multi 10 game losing streaks. You trade away the face of the franchise and Claude Giroux for a chance at the cup. Rip Florida Panthers, but whatever. Yeah, again, so this is a very important year for the Flyers, and I would put money that Chuck Fletcher's job is on the line this year, and if he does not, whether it's John Tortorella's fault, we could always go back in hindsight. I believe Chuck Fletcher's job could hinge on how this season starts, and also the upcoming draft. This is a very important transition time for Philadelphia. A lot of familiar pieces have been traded off. You look at some new blood that's in with Noah Cates, with Bobby Brink, just to name a few, Ronnie Attard. So they have some young blood in there. Do they respond to John Tortorella? I think that's the bigger question, Noah, is that do you have these young guns who are probably not used to this sort of style of coaching? Do they respond to that? And do the Flyers as an organization, how long is a leash for both John Tortorella and also maybe Chuck Fletcher and maybe some others in the front office? I think that's the big question.
If I told you that Columbus, San Jose, Buffalo, Detroit, Ottawa, Chicago, and New Jersey were going to have better seasons than Philadelphia at the start of last season, would you have believed me?
I would have laughed, but maybe.
maybe one or two of those teams, but certainly not all of them. So we're going to find out if the city of brotherly love does have it figured out, or if there's going to be some infighting among the family, so to speak.
Right.
Finally, signing news. Let's move to the other side of Pennsylvania. The Penguins have let it be known that signing Chris Letang to a multi-year deal is their top priority this season. Evgeny Malkin has also expressed his desire to stay, and of course management has too. But I kind of thought that was interesting how Chris Letang was kind of the front runner. Maybe they feel like that's maybe going to be the easier deal to maybe lock down. But I kind of think, especially with Evgeny Malkin being a career Penguin, as with Chris Letang, but with Malkin being a career Penguin and having that language barrier on top of that, and knowing that Pittsburgh has been his home, you feel like Malkin is maybe the more attractive option. But I know that he's had some injury issues. He's had some knee problems.
So is Letang.
Yeah. And they're both getting old. Let's be real. $23 million in cap space. So, I mean,
you kind of wonder, because again, in public, they're both saying the right things. I want to be there. We want them to be there. The question is, when you actually go behind closed doors, does it actually make sense? Does it work? And the Penguins, I think, are under a little bit more pressure. Was it 5 straight playoff series losses? Or was it 4 straight?
Yeah. Well, the one in the play-in round to Montreal really hurt.
So this team has been stuck in the first. They've been Minnesota Wild almost a little bit. Can't get out of the first round for the last 4 or 5 years.
Nick, we just talked about it. Chuck Fletcher's on the other side of Pennsylvania.
I know.
So the club's other pending UFAs include Rickard Rakell, who they got at the trade deadline, Evan Rodriguez, and backup goaltender Casey DeSmith. The RFAs are Kasperi Kapanen and Dayton Heinen. So, I mean, it's doable. And I think the move that management has expressed is you hope that those two stay, so Crosby can also be a career Penguin and finish out his career in the black and gold.
Crosby isn't going anywhere. I think the bigger question is I think they're looking in the mirror and they're assessing sort of what the Rangers did. Was it now 5 years ago where they sent out that email to season ticket holders and even onto social media says, we're going to be in a rebuild and this is going to be tough, but stick with us and we'll come out of it better. And they have. Rangers are a hell of a good, fun, young team to watch. You kind of wonder if Pittsburgh, with their recent non-playoff success, with looking at their core, which has provided them with multiple Stanley Cups, but also has not had the results as of late, especially in the postseason. They've had great regular seasons. You kind of wonder if there's some internal assessing, and it's that giant red button, Noah, right? It's like, do I hit the nuke button? And I think that's kind of what, as the upper management, they're looking at, is at what point do we push the button? And they know, and I think everybody else knows, that if you signal, if one doesn't come back, whether it's Malkin, Letang has been re-signed, but say he wasn't, I think that does signal what upper management might be thinking is, I think it's time to either piece by piece, we're going to start to try to maybe tear this thing down. So interesting to see what they do with Malkin. I think they will keep him. Question is, and I think my prediction, Noah, is Pittsburgh wants a short-term deal with Evgeny Malkin, maybe 1-2 years. And I think Malkin wants 3 to 4. Again, he's been injury prone. He's not played a lot of games. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. So have to kind of wait and see what they do. But I definitely think there's some tough decisions coming up for the Penguins, if not this season, but definitely next offseason, regardless of outcome.
You mentioned internal retooling. We're moving over to some player moves and player signings. Edmonton's netminder Mikko Koskinen has left the National Hockey League to sign with Lugano in the Swiss National League. Pending UFA, a .903 save percentage, 27 wins in 44 games for the former Edmonton Oiler. I always think it's funny every time I see Lugano as a destination, a hockey place, I always read it as Lanugo because of nursing, and Lanugo is the name for the fine hair that's on babies when they're born, so it's definitely not the same thing.
No.
But speaking of babies growing into men, 25-year-old Jeremy Law is on for the Nashville Predators, 4-year deal, $2 million per season, a pretty hard, heavy, physical, gritty guy.
That's a great pickup for Nashville.
Yeah, low risk, high reward, former Boston Bruin. Just like Bruce Cassidy, he is no longer in Boston. The New York Rangers inked Vitaly Kravtsov to a 1-year, $875 million extension as well. So those
$875 million, holy hell.
1,000. Let's go with 1,000. Yeah. Yeah,
where is that cap hit coming from?
The Vegas Golden Knights, they have the room now.
I think you meant Tampa.
Yeah, well,
anyway.
They're doing okay, but not as okay as they would like.
No.
Moving a little bit farther north, our final little piece, our only injury coming actually from the Washington Capitals. Center Nicholas Backstrom will have, quote, a lengthy recovery for left hip surgery after missing 28 games this season. He had 31 points in his remaining 47 contests, a career low in points per game. Nick Maxon joining myself, Noah Grant. Nick, it's a pleasure to have you on the show as we are approaching the midnight hour coming up on, as we would say, Nick, we're recording this on Saturday, but for the listeners, when you're listening to this on Sunday.
We're eventually going to Sunday the way this is going. So
yeah, we definitely are. Speaking of days, I want to know what you've been up to for the past week. I'm going to start with my own story. I didn't do much besides work and had some time off, but I will say, Nick, I know you're a working man, but if you ever find a free afternoon, I know it's not true to life entirely, but I would give it an 8.8 out of 10. I did see the new Top Gun Maverick movie, and for cinematics alone, holy smokes, it was a fantastic flick, especially as far as sequels go. So for those who have not gotten a chance to see it in theaters, I went to a movie for the first time in 4 years, and I got to be honest, Nick, I think even you would like it.
So for those who can hear the background noise, because I know it's being picked up, for those who can't see on the window behind me, it's littered with plants and cactuses. It helps to describe someone's personality, dry and prickish. But anyways, so to help with that, you have an aloe plant that just got set in front of me, and apparently that can heal all wounds because if you rip it off, anyway. I'm getting off on a tangent. So it's interesting because first of all, you need to refresh my brain here. My 90-year-old geriatric brain is lost. So please reset me. Were we talking about head coaching vacancies?
We are in a sense. I just want to know how your week was going.
I'm doing good, actually.
I would like you to know that the original Top Gun will save you from yourself. You weren't actually born yet. 1986.
Thank God, no, I was born in that year.
Yeah, but weren't you a late 86?
Define late.
I think Top Gun was a summer movie in 86, early summer movie.
Well, for those who definitely want to know, I was either a Valentine's Day baby or a New Year's Eve baby. You let me know. I have no idea. That was October.
As one would say, for those who are playing the home game.
Yeah, for those playing the home game, yes.
Yeah, literally and figuratively. I will say this: it was the original was cheesy, but in an iconic way.
Was it Monterey Jack or Colby?
Here's the thing. Well, there were no holes in this one. Okay,
so
maybe,
it wasn't Swiss. Got it.
Yeah, maybe a little bit in the plot line. I think if you really dive deep in it, but I think that's the aura of what Top Gun is. But this one was much better than the original, and that's hard to say for a sequel, especially one that's waited decades. So, speaking of things that involve decades, Nick, we've got you on the show. How was your week?
It's been busy.
He goes. You got to be kidding me.
I know. It's been incredibly busy. Still working through essentially some details. I guess maybe this is the time to maybe make a preliminary announcement. Very close to signing a deal that would put me not necessarily directly into a broadcasting firm, but would be put me into a place to cover a lot of hockey over the next year. So there's a counter offer that's out there. We'll put it that way. And if that gets essentially said yes, the likelihood of me inking that deal would be pretty high. So that's still doing some editing on the backhand, still working on a feature of the someone in the St. Cloud Huskies. So we're still doing some editing there. Trying to breathe. I mean, seriously, I'm working 7 days a week, so it's been nuts.
It's super exciting though, and for those who are wondering, the counter offer is Nick Maxson and 7 first rounders for Martin Hansel.
With Ryan White.
And how about who is the other one? The first round pick for the Wild, I'll just go Zach.
That was Zach Mitchell.
Yeah, is that right?
Or no, Zach Phillips.
There you go. Yeah, 28th overall. Yeah. So yeah, anyway,
I do remember some things. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm impressed. I'm
impressed too. Caleb would be like, how the hell that happened?
Yeah.
The light bulbs are on, Noah, and Caleb, just not in here.
No glasses though. The question is, 11:44 at night. You think Caleb's up? What do you think Caleb's doing right now?
He's not up. There's no way.
Well,
he's not at Val's.
He just tweeted like 10 minutes ago.
Okay, he can tweet from his bed. Big deal.
Yeah, he actually tagged us. I bet she's on. So I bet you he's in bed. He's got his nighttime jammies on, and he's sitting on social media just trying to figure out the punchline for tomorrow, related to one of us. I'm sure. But speaking of punchlines, looking towards the future, why don't we talk about some coaching vacancies here? And we're going to talk about, we have 3 coaching openings. So when I say openings, that means coaching vacancies, literal vacancies where there's not an interim coach in place. And then we have 4 teams, about to probably be 3 teams on this list, that have interim coaches here. So we're going to go through those. And really, we're going to talk about not necessarily who do you think the best fit is. If you have a coach in mind, definitely I want to hear it and we'll talk about it. But really more of what do each of these teams need in the new coach that they're getting? What is the appropriate action for their squads moving forward? So let's talk about Bruce Cassidy's Boston Bruins for the first opening, finishing 4th in the Atlantic Division at 107 points. That's not a phrase you hear every day.
No.
51 wins, 26 losses, 5 overtime losses. They do not
points and you finish 4th. How the hell does that happen?
Isn't that insane? They do not have a first round pick in the upcoming draft. They have a second, a third, a fourth, a 6th, and 2 7ths, and about $5.37 million in projected cap space. So Nick, the Bruins, they move away from Bruce Cassidy. It sounds like they need a better presence in the locker room, apparently. Beyond that, this is an interesting mix of players that the Bees have there at is it still TD Garden, or do they have a new name for their arena now? I can't even remember.
It might be Wambulance Garden for the way that the players are freaking whining. So no, and this is interesting, and this hasn't been talked a lot about. No, and I want to talk about the Boston Bruins as an organization a little bit, because their cap space isn't that great. They don't have a first round pick, and dare we say this team is pretty old, honestly. So I mean, their best young forward, David Pasternak's 26, but Brad Marchand's 34, Taylor Hall's 30, Charlie Coyle is 30 years old. How about that? Does that make you feel old?
And I do remember reading something. I don't think it was Bergeron, but I think it was David Krejci was like, I'm not returning to this team if there's something going on. And it's just the weird, Bees are in a weird spot for a team that just came off a 107.51 win season.
Weird. Nick Foligno, 34, Craig Smith, 32, Eric Holla, 31, Nosek, 29, Chris Wagner, 31, Patrice Bergeron, one of the best defensive forwards ever to play the game, 36 years old, right? So decently okay in the back end, but, if you look at the numbers, right, and you look at a coach that took a roster that's been, I think, mostly together the last 4 or 5 years since he's been at the helm, they just couldn't get it done. They had their opportunity in 2019 against St. Louis. The Blues got their first ever Stanley Cup win. Congrats to them. But you kind of wonder, again, without a first round pick, so they traded it away at some point to go for a cup run. You have no cap space. Does this not scream potential, like just inevitable rebuild at some point coming soon?
Yeah.
So you kind of wonder, they're the most curious team here, because if you're a head coach and you're looking at that forward roster, you've got obviously some talent, but you got aging talent. You wonder when the drop-offs are coming. You wonder how much more you're going to be able to get out of, your players from this.
Yeah.
And then at one point, does the front office just pull the plug?
They remind me of the Minnesota Wild, maybe from like 2010 to like 2015. The Wild were a team. I don't think they were as good as the Bruins are now, but they remind me of a team that they had an aging roster, and Minnesota was kind of a place where players' careers came to die for a little bit.
And I would say 07, 08, because then that was Rolston, Demitra, you
right,
had some older guys there.
Right. But where I say that is that the Wild stayed afloat because they would have at least one or two aging contract that would either be re-upped at close to league minimum, or they were on their way out because of retirements or whatever it was. And
Correct.
That's kind of how they stayed afloat. And they found that one or two draft pick or youth infusion or one trade that kind of kept them afloat. That's where I kind of see the Bruins sitting right now. And you look at the rest of the Atlantic. Florida had a great year. Toronto had a great year. Tampa obviously is doing all right for themselves, albeit the Stanley Cup final could be better. This Bruins squad is not looking like the competitive team to be in the top three that you go back a couple of years. They were one of the teams to beat at the top of the Atlantic here.
And that's very true. And so, and I guess what's curious to me is, I get it. Players have a lot of leverage when obviously multiple, and it sounds like Patrice Bergeron is rumored to also have some disdain for Bruce Cassidy as well. Again, going back to David Krejci is another one that at least has been rumored publicly. So if there's those two, I'd imagine there's maybe more. Again, we don't know for sure. But why would, I think the bigger question, Noah, is why would upper management pull the plug on a coach that got you to 107 points with an aging roster? And that some of these same players who are making these claims may be out of the league at some point soon.
Yeah.
It's curious to me. And I don't mean that in any disrespect to Bergeron or Krejci, because again, Bergeron's going to be a Hall of Famer. No questions asked. David Krejci has carved himself out a nice career, but you kind of wonder as an organization that if those are the voices that you're listening to, maybe, dare I say, Cassie maybe got out at the right time.
Yeah.
Dare I? But then again, he's going to another very interesting location in Vegas. So I don't know. I think, do you bring in a veteran coach who can try to, push them a little bit more, or do you bring in a younger coach? I think a younger coach for Boston at this point would be too high risk. So I could see honestly Barrett Trotz there. They play more of a defensive system. I think, there's enough firepower still for them to make some noise. But again, you're in a very tough Atlantic division that it's just completely stacked, especially now that Florida has kind of risen to the occasion. So we'll see. I think you need a veteran coach in that group that can mesh well with some veterans that obviously hold a lot of the buying power. I think we've seen that already. And if I'm Boston, it's going to be, it's ride or die right now. I think you're looking for another cup run, at least maybe in the next 2 or 3 years. And then I think at that point you have to blow it up.
Yeah. Rick Tocchet, maybe Paul Maurice, a couple other names that I would throw in that camp a little bit, maybe. So, moving on over to the Atlantic Division foe, somewhat near the Boston Bruins, but not particularly close, the Detroit Red Wings. They have head coaching vacancy as well. 32, 40, and 10, 74 points, good for 6th in the Atlantic. A pretty good stockpile of both draft picks and cap space. They have a first, 2 seconds, a third, 3 fourths, a fifth, and 2 sevenths, and just over $35 million in projected cap space. They have missed the playoffs for now the 6th straight season. They were 26 points out of a spot this year. Nick, Detroit needs a lot of things, head coach notwithstanding. I thought they were maybe the team that we thought was going to have a better year than they did. They're still missing a couple pieces here.
They are, and we talked a couple years ago how when the roster was constructed and after Ken Holland left, that it was kind of in disarray, right? That Jeff Blashill, not really on him. Stevie Y comes and takes over, and he gives Blashill an opportunity to try to turn the roster around. With Moritz Seider, to name one of them, with Lucas Raymond, some good young talent. Still got Dylan Larkin. You got Tyler Bertuzzi. You got some good young talent, but just not enough improvement So it was the right decision to unfortunately cut ties with Blashill. This is where I almost think, to me, the best fit would be for Barry Trotz, because there was a lot of offensive greatness with Detroit, not great defensively. That was the biggest weakness, despite having one of the better young defensemen in Sider really, really make his name known this last season. So to me, Detroit, I think they could go either way, right? You can almost bring in a young coach to mesh with young players. You could also bring in a veteran winning coach that can settle them down defensively. So
can I go off the wall here?
Yeah. I mean, what else is new?
Pete DeBoer.
No.
Pete DeBoer, and the reason I say Pete DeBoer is Pete DeBoer, for all of his woes in terms of his media presence, both with the San Jose Sharks and with the Vegas Golden Knights, has been able to play with mixed groups, with young groups, with old groups, and he's been able to play a more offensively dynamic style. And the Red Wings, they need a little bit of defensive help, or a lot of defensive help. I think some of that comes down to goaltending, but he kind of reminds me of a coach that maybe is looking for a new destination and a fresh start, and Detroit, under the direction of Stevie Y, mind you, might be able to give him that direction because of that general management influence, and someone who might be able to keep the reins on Peter and keep him kind of grounded into what the mission is, and that's the on-ice product and the day-to-day type things, and keep him out of the extracurriculars as far as the media. So that's my off-the-wall pick on this one.
That's actually, now that I think about it, it's not the worst pick in the world.
And I look at the rest of this list. To say Pete DeBoer is not an NHL coach anymore, I think would be a stretch. I think that he does have a place here in this league. The question is, I look at this list and I don't see maybe the next team on this list, but other than that, I don't think any other ones really kind of stick out. But
sure. And for Detroit too, they have, I think, a lot of where their future is going to lie actually starts with Stevie Y this offseason. Again, a lot of draft picks, a lot of cap space. You kind of wonder how aggressive they might be in the free agent market. Does Detroit become a landing place for, say, maybe a Minnesota Wild player?
Especially with that cap space.
Especially with that cap space. So you kind of wonder, do you add a little bit more offensive push, even though they've got some? I don't think maybe enough, especially in a competitive Eastern Conference. They need more help on the defensive end. So, but is Stevie Y ready to overpay for that? I don't think he is. We know Stevie Y is a very calculated, very incredibly smart GM. A big reason why Tampa is where they're at the last couple of years. So, credit to Stevie Y. He's got a lot of work to do, and I actually could see Pete DeBoer there, now that I think about it, but I also think Barry Trotz could do well there as well.
Well, we'll have to see. Detroit could definitely use a shot in the arm. Just ask Tyler Bertuzzi.
Oh, boy.
Moving on to the Dallas Stars. They are the last team that has a true legitimate opening here in the National Hockey League. 46-30-6 for 98 points, which was fourth in the Central Division. Actually, not too shabby of a year considering how up and down Dallas was.
And how anemic they were offensively.
Yeah, they have a draft pick, just a single one in every round. They are pretty par for the course here. Projected cap space of just under $18 million for this season. Their entire coaching staff will need to be replaced after stepping down this past offseason. And also both the Stars and Red Wings are both eyeing defenseman Jeff Petrie, who is at $6.25 million average annual value with 3 years left on his deal, 34 years of age, 248 points in just over 500 games with Montreal during that time. Detroit probably has the better cap space, but the better fit is always a question mark. But the Stars need to take care of their coaching vacancies first. Is there anybody that sticks in mind? And moreover, how do the Stars find a way to keep goose eggs on the board on the other side and get one off of theirs on the offensive front?
They're an interesting franchise of the last 10 years, right? When Sagan and Ben were first, supposedly united, they were dual 40 goal scorers. They were, just vaunted offensive team, but again, couldn't play any defense. And now it's ironic how the seesaw has swung completely the opposite way, where defensively they were okay. They're not a juggernaut by any means. They're not a Mike Zimmer defense. Yes, Vikings fans, I triggered you, and that's fine. But at the end of it, they couldn't score. And for guys,
is that important?
A little bit, and especially with on their D on the defensive line, you've got John Klingberg and Miro Heiskanen too, that are some of the better offensive defensemen in the league. I think it was quite shocking to see how tough it was for that team to score. This is where I think Paul Maurice makes a good fit here in Dallas, just because I think he does have a little bit more wide open style, allows the offense to go. He's got mobile defensemen. We've seen how Winnipeg did when they had Dustin Byfuglien, and I think that style and that type of approach would benefit Dallas because, again, Dallas is in a kind of a weird situation too, going with Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn. They're not getting any younger. In fact, I'm going to check real quickly how old those two players are, because
and the better question, how unproductive they've been.
Yes. And so, okay, so Tyler Seguin's 30, Jamie Benn's 32, Joe Pavelski, for being 37, is probably their best steal as their 37-year-old assistant captain of $5.5 million. But how about this? Jamie Benn, with their non-production, $9.5 million until 24-25. Tyler Seguin, $9.85 million to 26-27. So you got to get those two. You got to get those two rolling, and you got to give them some help too. You see some good sort of secondary help. I think, to me, their best secondary help was Dennis Gurianov. Rope Hintz had a good year. So did Radek Fox. But beyond that, their depth up front is not great. They spend a lot of money in the blue line. Again, Miro Haskin, $8.45 million, I believe, till 28-29. Esa Lindell, $5.8 million. Suter, again, whoever the hell that is, $3.65 million until 24-25. Then Yanni Hakanpää.
And you mentioned, too, Tyler Seguin, fourth on the team with 49 points, and Jamie Benn, sixth with 46. And that's far cry from Hintz, Robertson, and Pavelski at 72, 79, and 81, respectively. And you're paying almost $19 million for that kind of production. And not to say it's bad, but
it is not to the value of their contract.
Yeah, it's not. And, I think that's always the challenge with players. You sign a contract and then you are expected to uphold that standard of the contract. I think, if you want to be theoretical, there's not a lot of players that do match the value of their contract. Like, if you want to be fair with the injury bug, Sidney Crosby hasn't technically matched the value of his contract production-wise some seasons, but he has 2 Stanley Cups. So there's your answer for that one. There's a lot of pieces, I think, that have to go with the Dallas Stars. Goaltending wise, Jake Ottinger, looks like the steal for them right now. He's the real deal.
Yeah, he's the real deal. And that gives them, if there's anything that's kind of been almost the big turnstile in goal, going back to Ben Bishop, who had health problems, and then going back to, really since Kari Lettinen's departure,
Marty Turco.
Let's go through it. Geez, when you're having to start in a playoff game, the Kazakhstan fanatic and the scorpion kick, my goodness. He played his lights out, but obviously above expectation.
Still doesn't beat the name of Ron Tugnut, though. So
that's true.
But speaking of above,
or Ziggy Palffy, that's a good one.
I always forget he played for them.
Yeah.
Speaking of above expectations, though, let's move over to the interim tags. I was going in the order of east to west. We have 1 East team, 3 West teams. So we're going to start with one of the West teams, though, because this is the closest reported deal. So the Edmonton Oilers, the interim tag, finishing second in the Pacific at 104 points, 49 wins, 27 losses, 6 OT losses. Not a lot of draft picks. A first, a fifth, a sixth, and a seventh, and just under $7 million in projected cap space. The interim coach has been Jay Woodcroft since February 10th, when Coach Tippett left. The Oilers are actually
Maurice.
No, it was Tippett. It was.
Oh no, I'm thinking Winnipeg. I'm an idiot.
Yeah,
Coach Tippett didn't leave; he was kicked out the door. But sure.
Yeah. Well, I try to be nice about it. But the Oilers are being nice. From our everyone's wild favorite, Kevin Weeks, reporting that Jay Woodcroft is on the verge of signing a 3-year deal. So I think that one is probably signed
and much deserved. And much deserved. That team was the hottest team out of the gate during the opening of the season. Then they literally went the opposite way; couldn't win a game. So they parted ways. In fact, a lot of people in oil country were calling for that for weeks. And I think a lot of people, including myself, were wondering why it was taking them so long. Jay Woodcroft goes at the helm, and they were, well, honestly, statistically, the best team in the league since he took over February 10th. Obviously got to the Western Conference Final. They just ran into a freaking freight train known as the Colorado Avalanche. So pretty impressive run, actually, by the Edmonton Oilers. And you got to wonder, with especially with Connor McDavid, can you imagine he's 25 now? 24, 25, that you talk about him being in his prime. I think oil country knows you got to start making some deeper runs like they had this last year. And with Jay Woodcroft at the helm, it was an easy signing for this one. So not obviously formally announced, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was coming in the coming days.
Yeah, and don't believe the video online on social media about Connor McDavid after being out on a night on the town. That video is old, so for
Very
those who have been
old.
following social media,
come on.
be wary on that one. Let's talk about some former Minnesota Wild ties. Andrew Brunette, the current interim head coach of the Florida Panthers, the President's Trophy winners, first in the Atlantic Division, of course, because that's how that works. 122 points, 58 wins, 18 losses, 6 OT losses. They do not have a pick in the first 2 rounds, but they have every pick since then, including a second 6th round pick from the Toronto Maple Leafs and just over $2.7 million in cap space. They were kind of in win now mode. They still kind of are. Not a lot of cap space. Apparently, Barry Trotz, Peter DeBoer, Travis Green, Rick Tocchet, and potentially Paul Maurice have all been interviewed by the Panthers in addition to Andrew Brunette. Nick, I know who your pick is going to be. The question is, why... If you're on the outside looking in and you enjoyed what Andrew Brunette did, for those who are not curious about how this works, is this a common practice for the Florida Panthers to still go seeking with some interviews?
Well, nothing about the Florida Panthers in history has ever been common practice. So that's a false predicate. But it's impressive with Andrew Brunette how he took essentially a system that was implemented by Joel Quenneville. We'll get back to him, I'm assuming, in a different episode. But didn't really change much and was able to just continue to let the wheels turn by themselves, right? Now, there are some question marks with Andrew Brunette. I'm not as sold on him, and I think, this is a common practice, per se. If you're the Florida Panthers, who I think are trying to strike while the iron is hot, that's a frustrated franchise, again, who this is the first time they've won a run in over 25 years. So they want to be relevant again, and I think they are essentially, as you mentioned, in win now mode, and I think they're trying to do whatever it takes to be able to get there. Florida, as good as their record was, there are some asterisks, right? They had to come back from multi-goal leads more than their fair share at times. The second round against the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Eastern Conference champs, I mean, they weren't even in close in that series. So you kind of wonder if that might be something that the Panthers are looking at more. Is that I think the roster they have, they'll be fine in the regular season, but I think with the way they were just completely stonewalled in the second round, that they maybe look somewhere else. I mean, I think Andrew Brunette gets a healthy look, but I don't know. I'm not as concrete on that as maybe you might think.
Yeah, well, the Panthers did set that pedigree. Say what you want about the man, but he's good at coaching. Joel Quenneville was their attractive pickup until life caught up to him. Speaking of someone else that was involved in that piece, and if you don't know what we're talking about, well, that stinks. But Kevin Cheveldayoff is the general manager of the Winnipeg Jets. Also part of this piece. Actually, just got a 3-year deal a couple of weeks ago. 89
in Winnipeg.
Yeah, 89 points. Tell us how you really feel, Nick.
I don't get it. Anyway,
89 points, 6th in the Central Division for them. Kind of a down year, 39 wins, 32 losses, 11 overtime finishes. They do have a first rounder, 2 seconds, a third, a fourth, a 6th, and a 7th, and just over $16 million in projected cap space. Interim coach Dale Lowry, he's going to get an interview as the Jets have just begun their coaching search. Pretty fun little story coming out of this, though, Nick, as we cruise through our last 2 teams here. Winnipeg Brewery says that it will give Barry Trotz free beer for life if he returns to his native province to coach the Jets. Little Brown Jug Brewing Company and a local sports talk show hashed the campaign on Monday, several months into the club's coaching search. And Little Brown Jug also pledged to brew a beer of Trotz's choice, commemorating his return if it comes to pass. So kind of a fun little marketing thing that they're doing. Will it sway the opinion? I don't know, but Trotz could look good behind the bench up there in the peg.
Well, Trotz will be great behind any bench, right? But Little Brown Jug, first of all, I don't like little jugs of beer. I like big jugs of beer. 2, if it's brown, it probably needs to be washed. What the hell is going on? But
oh, what do you know? You only work in the restaurant industry.
This is true. I know, right? So interesting, right? So it's funny how the Winnipeg Jets, how they want change, but yet they don't when they re-up their GM that's been there since essentially their move up to Winnipeg from Atlanta. You kind of wonder too, does this explain or maybe hint at why Maurice stepped down
Yeah.
a little bit. Whereas, was there some constraints that he was facing from management above him?
Yeah.
It's interesting, right?
Dare I say constraints from personnel below him? Can I go that avenue? And
Sure.
the reason I say, there's a timeline on all NHL coaches, some longer than
Yep.
others, as you can clearly tell. But a lot of times it kind of goes the way of the Bruce Cassidy situation, where GM takes a look at a coach and says, this is not the best fit for what we have going on. I wonder if Paul Maurice kind of felt his time was over in Winnipeg. They were slumping, and you have a little bit of that locker room distraction. Blake Wheeler's trying to keep things together, but you have Mark Scheifele, who's doing his own little thing, making some weird media quirks. You had the whole Patrick Laine situation a couple of years ago. Winnipeg's a tough environment in a Canadian market. It's a tough environment to live in, climate-wise too. Kind of a dreary city that a lot of people have talked about. I love Winnipeg, been there many times, but that's just kind of the scouting report. If you're talking about Winnipeg, it's not the most attractive option for a lot of coaches. And Paul Maurice stuck it out since the franchise was essentially getting their restart back in 2011. And I wonder if it kind of became old hat for him, and he sees greener and potentially sunnier pastures in front of him. So dare I say that a personnel change, kind of maybe similar a little bit to Rick Bowness in Dallas, where the coach took a look at the team and the direction and said, you know what, maybe this isn't for me anymore.
It's possible. At the end of it, Winnipeg, I think in a more dire situation than right. I think they have some serious self-reflection that need to be doing.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that. Maybe just wear, a suit made out of mirrors, and then you can sit down and reflect all you want, but sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there's definitely something that has to change in Winnipeg, and there's reports that Scheifele's on the trade block, and you kind of wonder if that's the route they're going to go. However, and it may be with Cheveldayoff having a fresh 3-year extension. Now, mind you, GMs, when you sign extensions, are never ever safe. So you kind of wonder, with maybe some new life, does he decide to maybe pull some strings or make some roster moves that maybe aren't particularly popular, maybe with fans, but it may be necessary. They still got some good talent on that roster. Kyle Connor, a fantastic scorer. Again, one of the more underrated scorers in the NHL. Just happens to be on a Winnipeg squad that just couldn't quite keep up in the Western Conference this year.
Yeah.
So hard to say. I'm not really sure what Winnipeg is going to do there. Again, you have the same GM now for the 12th season that will be at the helm. 11th season. I keep my numbers right. So I don't know. Long time. And again, I think that fan base is growing a little bit apathetic, and there definitely is going to need to be some improvement with that rush. And you kind of wonder if by next trade deadline, if they're still in the same position, if we don't see some familiar foes be sent away.
Let's talk about trades. Our last team, Alex DeBrincat, a 41-goal season for him. He is on the market for Chicago Blackhawks and their interim coach, Derek King. The Hawks are not an exciting destination, which is wild to say, but we're at that point. They are the only other team besides Detroit on this list to have a losing record last season. Also an interesting caveat to some coaching changes as well. 28, 42, and 12, 68 points, good for 7th in the Central. They do not have a first-round pick in the upcoming draft. They have 2 seconds, one of which comes from the Minnesota Wild and the Marc-Andre Fleury deal. 3 third rounders, 2 6th rounders, and a 7th rounder, and just under $25 million in projected cap space. Hawks are a curious case, and the Seth Jones deal doesn't look great.
It looks like crap.
is it full rebuild time for the Hawks, or can they find a retool on the fly?
It's interesting that the player we're talking about is Alex DeBrincat. Yeah, and I say that because he's their best young forward. And here's why. If you do end up trading DeBrincat, it is full rebuild. 100%. $6.4 million, a restricted free agent, which means any team that signs him has a little bit more control over that next deal, per se, whether it's a bridge deal or whether you just go full smoke on him. But then the questions become not about DeBrincat, but then what about Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane? Because I do think that if you trade DeBrincat, you have to think one, if not both, are going to be in the blocking. Patrick Kane, 33, Jonathan Taves, 34, DeBrincat only 24. This still is a pretty young squad, albeit the average age is only 25. Again, the back end, Seth Jones, that hasn't been great.
Yeah.
Jake McCabe, Riley Stillman, Alex Vlasic, Calvin DeHaan, Eric Gustafson. So their blue line is decimated, to say the least.
Yeah, a lot of names that you go through that you go, who? Not household names in a lot of respects.
No, it's not Jalmerson, Seabrook, Duncan Keith,
yeah.
and who was Jalmerson's partner for the longest time? Why can't I think of his name?
Jalmerson, Seabrook, Keith. Why is there another one? Maybe there's not.
I thought there. Why can't I think of this?
I mean, Nick Leddy was there for a while.
Leddy, yeah, for a while, sure.
You know, and here's the thing: you talk about big names. Both the big contracts at just over $10 million for Kane and Taves come off the books after next year. I think Patrick Kane, unless something crazy happens, it's going to be obviously not as expensive, but I think he's going to be a lifer in a Chicago sweater. He's broken all the records, and he's the better of the two players.
I don't know.
Here's the thing, though. If I'm Chicago, and we talked about really it was Alex DeBrincat and Brendan Hagel being the cornerstones that the Hawks needed to build around Hagel, of course, getting moved in that deal to Tampa Bay. If I'm the Hawks, I'm biting the bullet for another season. I'm hanging on to DeBrincat. As much as the return of high picks and prospects sounds eluding, you have a known commodity in DeBrincat. I think you ride it out for another year. You hang on to Patrick Kane on another deal, and Jonathan Taves, unless it's team friendly, is on his way out the door, and you start the rebuild from there. You have an aging veteran who still can play the game of hockey, who's still effective in Patrick Kane, who pairs well with Alex DeBrincat, and you build around that core, and you're still in a rebuild, but you're not full all hands on deck, tear it down, blow it up. And I think that's the move.
I disagree, and here's why. You've got to strike now. You have to strike now. And here's why. It's so from a team perspective, you're not wrong per se, because you're like, hey, you have this guy, but here's the problem. When you have a value of DeBrincat and you have essentially every GM calling you and going, what do I need to grab? This is the most he's going to command. The risk that you take by keeping him another season is, does he fall off? Does he get injured? And then all of a sudden his trade value goes down. You don't have any trade pieces in Patrick Kane or Jonathan Taves, because again, even if they play well, not a lot of teams are going to be able to fit them under their salary cap, right? So I think, and this is why DeBrincat's name is being talked about now, is that this is more so securing those high-level assets now and not taking the risk that he falls off or gets injured, and therefore the rebuild that you are very clearly setting yourself up for, that you already essentially started, as you mentioned, with the move of Brandon Hagel. You cannot turn away those high valued assets just because you have one more year. That's to me too high a risk.
Unfortunately for the Hawks, though, we've seen this song play out before. Artemi Panarin, Brandon Saad, guys that were able to walk it. The return was okay, but it wasn't great.
So this is why I'm arguing, if you're getting the calls now on that high of interest and someone's willing to pay, you got to take it.
But that's what I'm saying. If you get rid of Alex DeBrincat and you get 2 picks and 2 prospects and they don't pan out.
But that's also the risk you take, because at least you get the 2 picks and the prospects. Whereas if he gets injured or he has a terrible season on a terrible team, and all of a sudden the GMs are like, you know what, I don't know.
It's
I can find somebody cheaper.
It's a draft class that's a little bit weak this year. And here's the thing.
That's the thing. Here's
the thing, though, Nick. Like, if you give away Alex DeBrincat, and let's say you get 2 players,
you're not giving them away. You're going to get a good haul.
Right, but I'm saying just hear me out. 2 picks and 2 prospects, and they don't pan out. Or let's say they do pan out. Let's say they're all right. Let's say they're middle 6 or top 9 forwards.
Sure.
Is that enough to replace Alex DeBrincat? Is that move enough?
You're not replacing DeBrincat right now. That's the thing.
But you're replacing him down the line. Alex DeBrincat is 24 years old. He's going to be a stud. Unless something crazy happens, he's going to be a stud NHLer for the next decade.
Sure. But you have nothing on that squad to build around him and maximize his potential? Nothing. So that's kind of
you have Patrick Kane though. That's what I'm saying. Patrick Kane and Alex DeBrincat have been
good.
wildly productive on a team that sucks.
That's the thing though, is at what point does it fall off? The risk of the fall off is higher than the reward that you would possibly get by keeping him.
I don't know.
And that's
he's a 40-goal scorer. Like
right. But again,
on a
you
team that's
mentioned
terrible.
Patrick, but that's the thing. That's why people are calling and like, okay, this kid's talent is actually legit. We want this kid. And Chicago has already indicated, as I mentioned before, they are due for a full nuke rebuild. Yeah. And you have to. Well, here's the thing. I'm
just saying, DeBrincat's the cornerstone. He's the cornerstone you build around in the rebound. He is the one foundational piece that you build around. It's not Seth Jones. It's not Patty Kane.
It's not. No, and that's the other thing too. Is the league revenues. If they continue to go in a spot where Bettman, I think, is still being kind of conservative about. And thank you to Alan Walsh, who said, hey, pre-pandemic, you were at $5 million in revenue, now 5.2. Shut up. It's not that big of a deal. That's actually true. But if all of a sudden your revenues are as high as you say, or maybe they increase, because again, a lot of reporters have said that those numbers are conservative, and you are able to pay off the players' escrow and do it fast, and now all of a sudden those salary caps can shoot up quite rapidly, which I hope it does. I think Chicago is looking at everything timing wise and saying, hey, not only could we do this, because again, anytime you make a trade, anytime, whether it's picks or prospects, I mean, hell, even if you get Artemi Panarin back, just as an example, a known commodity, it's still a risk because he can have no chemistry with his line mates, right? It doesn't matter what you're getting him back for. It's the fact that if you can get either the quantity or the quality of the assets, you have to agree to it at that time.
And that's my point, is that we've seen the quality of a player like Alex DeBrincat with only one guy riding shotgun. That's how skilled he is. But nonetheless, I don't know why we're arguing about the Blackhawks, because we're Wild fans, and anytime the Blackhawks suck, that's better news for us.
I'm just saying, like, because
I understand your point.
One further point. Even let's just say they do make a trade, right? There's not much left for them. Honestly, I mean,
that's my point. Like
so it's like, and that's why you trade him.
Yeah,
that's why, because you're not going to be able to rebuild them around fast enough.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Why trade Alex DeBrincat when you know what you're getting, and he can play even on a poor team until you rebuild? Those two picks or two players might not be enough to spark the rebuild process. It's going to take Patty Kane and Jonathan Taves coming off the books. They need cap space and they need signings. And
I'm not as convinced you are that Patty Kane is a lifer. I think that Patty Kane's a competitor. I feel like if there was an offer on a playoff competitive team, because Chicago,
I meant out of the two of them.
No, I get it.
Yeah,
I get that. Of them. I could see them both being gone. Honestly, Taves and Kane, I think they're both one other shot of a cup. And depending on, again, I think the DeBrincat trade, depending on how they view that, if they look along, because we know the roster, right? There's not a lot of household names. If DeBrincat's gone, does Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves want to stay on that, or do they want to go to a playoff contender?
All right.
And with UFA status, why not test the market?
So we've determined that Eric Daze and the Hawks are headed to Houston along with Arizona. Okay.
Along with John Madden, yes.
Yeah. NHL round 4, Stanley Cup playoffs, Stanley Cup final. Colorado 2, Tampa Bay 0. Game 3 is Monday night, June 21st in Tampa. All games from here on out, 7 o'clock Central Time. Game 4 Wednesday, June 22nd in Tampa. They pretty much just alternate every other day. Game 5, I can't believe I'm saying this, if necessary, is Friday in Colorado. Game 6, if necessary, Sunday. And Game 7, if necessary, Monday, June 28th in Colorado, 7 p.m. Central Time. Nick, interestingly enough, as we talk about dates, the Cup was, of course, won on August 1st of 2020 when we had the delayed start with COVID. Besides that, which Stanley Cup final has went the latest in the year? This will break the record. Besides that August 1st, this will break the record for latest Stanley Cup final. It has happened in the last 2 decades, and it did go all the way to 7 games. So That narrows it down.
Well, Game 7 Stanley Cup final. How about Dallas Buffalo?
No, in the last. Well, I guess that is.
That would be technically 2 decades. Well, kind
no,
of.
not math. You just flex your big brain there.
Detroit, Pittsburgh.
I'll give you one more shot. There was at least one former St. Cloud State player in this game.
Was it Tampa in 2004 against Calgary?
Carolina, Edmonton, Game 7.
Okay. Oh, 2006. Oh, Hedeken.
June 5th, 2006. So, fun little tidbit there. That was not from Wikipedia, so calm down. It was from FUpedia. Anyway. Actually, it was actually harder to find. I actually had to go to the NHL website and click through all the results and see which one was the latest. So, the
NHL stat website sucks, by the way, but that's a different conversation.
Let's talk about results. 7-0 finish in Game 2 for the Colorado Avalanche. Tampa Bay, through the first 3 rounds of the series in the first period, their goal differential is +5. In this series, it is -5 or -6. I think it's -5. And the goal differential right now is not looking good, 10-3.
Not good.
Yeah, Tampa Bay, we've seen this story before. Even in Game 1 against Toronto, where it took them a hot minute to figure out their opponent. Nick, the
Rangers. Yep.
Does Tampa Bay do what they do best, or is Colorado just too good?
You wonder if Tampa is out of gas, honestly, because it's not. I mean, the 61-second penalty in. Wasn't it a hooking call by McDonough? It was a roughing call. It was a roughing call.
Yeah.
Okay.
They had no answer. They were
had no answer.
15-1 in the first 10 minutes tonight.
There was some frustration calls. There was what we call chasing the game penalty calls. We knew the speed of Colorado was going to be the Avalanche's biggest threat in this series. And you kind of wonder how Tampa would contain that. And again, Colorado coming off almost a week of rest. Tampa going the distance, Game 7 against the Rangers. Game 6. I'm sorry. They went 7 with who did they go 7? It was Toronto. Yeah. So they've had a lot of hockey in them. I know the past 3 years have had a lot of hockey in them. My goodness, they're back-to-back cup winners. But to your point, they were down 2-0 to the Rangers before they caught fire back on home ice. I'm not as confident this time around. I'm not. Colorado is just that fast. You talk about how when you're in the Stanley Cup final and you're that close to raising a championship trophy, how Colorado just seemed like they were toying with their opponent and they were twisting the knife. And you kind of wonder what reset, and it's going to have to be a quick one. Again, only a day's rest going to Game 3. What kind of maybe lineup adjustments that we see? Do we see a re-energized Lightning down at Amalie Arena in Tampa? It's a tough order. I say it's a sweep unless the Lightning take it Game 3. They have to have it.
Well, it's good they're at home. They've been good at home. The Avalanche are now, after tonight, they are now 8-1 in the playoffs in games in which they've scored first. Their only loss coming as an overtime loss against which team? St. Louis, correct.
The only teams they have given them a loss this postseason.
Yeah, so it's gonna be interesting. This Avs team, holy crap, are they good? I mean, and it was interesting with the return of Braden Point. And, the loss of Nazem Kadri for Colorado, the fact that the better goaltender on paper is Andrei Vasilevsky, we thought that Colorado had some gremlins that they had to get through. Now, granted, the series isn't over. Things could swing back in the opposite direction, but
last change will be big, especially at home.
It's been, how about that? How about the Avs going, literally 12-2, now 14-2 in the playoffs. Like that is utter dominance.
That's almost 2012 Kings, except the Kings were the 8th seed coming in and not the number 1, full steam ahead, 800 horsepower machine that Colorado is.
Yeah. Unbelievable how good this Colorado team is. And we didn't get a chance to talk about who our picks would have been before the series. I had Colorado, and I'm not saying that just because they're up to nothing. I had them as maybe being the team that was going to be just too good for Tampa Bay. But again, you never really count the Lightning out. But like you mentioned, we talked about how pivotal Game 3 was going to be against the Rangers in last series, and that it was the biggest Game 3 of their Cup final run so far. This one takes even more precedent.
This one takes the cake for sure.
Gotta have this because the Rangers were a young team that had some weaknesses that could be exploited. Colorado's a well-oiled machine with not a lot of glaring holes. If anything, maybe Darcy Kemper, but he's been absolutely fine, as proven through the first 2 games. So,
well, and to Darcy Kemper's point is that he hasn't had to be. I think that's the biggest thing is that Colorado's structure has really, I think if I saw the stat correctly tonight, Nikita Kucherov had 0 shot attempts the entire game. That's not going to win you hockey games if you're the Tampa Bay Lightning. But you got to credit Colorado for being able to contain him. Steven Stamkos, again, Alex Killorn, Andre Palat, Braden Point, and even the guys in the back end, Victor Hedman, Mikhail Sergachev. These are guys that got championship pedigree. And you kind of wonder if there's any team that can try to claw back in this. You wonder if Tampa can reach back and feel confident. They're as you mentioned, there's still games to be won. The series is not over. Again, they've been in this position not that long ago. But again, this is a much different, much bigger, much more ferocious beast that they're up against in Colorado. And I'm kind of wondering, with not that it was 7-0, Noah, but just how they lost. Again, they just look more than a step slow. You see them chasing the game quite a bit. You see the frustration mounting, especially offensively for Tampa. And I think that's going to be the key is, they'll get last change. You kind of wonder if they'll maybe with those matchups that they want, they'll be able to get more offensive chances. And again, back on home ice, maybe they get re-energized. We'll see, but it's going to be interesting. I still think Colorado, I had Tampa, I'm not going to lie, but Colorado is looking just way too dangerous right now, and it would not shock me if Colorado won this series.
Yeah, I'm thinking Colorado in 5, but we'll have to see. We're going to move on to our extra ice session. We had a very long main portion of the show, so we'll try to keep it short and sweet here. We're going to talk a little bit of free agency and see about the top unrestricted free agents on the market. Welcome into our extra ice session. Nick Maxon alongside myself, Noah Grant. Nick, taking a look at some UFAs here, pulling up cap friendly. We're just going to talk, I think, unrestricted free agents. No RFAs in this conversation today, except for maybe a little tidbit about Kevin Fiala, if it makes sense. I have them pulled up for cap friendly and, looking at maybe kind of going through like the top 25, going from the back end up. One of the first names that kind of caught my eye at number 23. That's been an intriguing case this season, and intriguing to see where he ends up. Where does Evander Kane go?
Oh boy. His story is more complicated because you got to remember his grievance against the San Jose Sharks has not been finished yet.
Yeah. And just a casual 39 points in 43 games this year,
Right. I would think that depending on how that whole thing plays out, I could see Edmonton wanting him back. That was a dynamic line for them. The question is at what cost? Edmonton is essentially without a goaltender, Mikko Koskinen going over to Europe to the Swiss League.
They have
saw that coming, unfortunately. How long can you honestly ride Mike Smith? So they're going to be in the need for a goaltender.
Big problem. Sorry to interrupt you, but $7.1 million in cap space. They have 3 RFAs, 5 UFAs on the forward side, and 2 UFAs on the back end.
Yeah, it's not looking pretty for Edmonton.
Including some some guy, Jesse Puljujarvi, Kailer Yamamoto. Evander Kane is probably the only big name. How about the fact that Kyle Turris is not a big name anymore in the NHL? Like he used to be.
He fell off a brick after getting out of Ottawa. I think he had that one playoff stint when he was at Nashville. Was he there with that Stanley Cup final? And I think he wasn't he? Wasn't he a deadline acquisition for them?
Yeah. Well, their other big challenge too, and I don't know if his career where he's at, but Oscar Klefbom is on IR at $4.1 million, and they still got to figure out their goaltending situation.
Yeah,
so
they're a mess. So yeah, that's going to be tough. Just because again, that whole roster they're going to have to maybe go bottom of the barrel scraping to be able to make it under the cap. It's going to be interesting. That's for sure.
Definitely. Max Domi is a UFA. Had kind of a down year for Carolina. Ricard Raquel, we'll see if he stays with the Penguins like we talked about earlier, as well as Evgeny Malkin sitting at 20 and 21. Malkin was hurt for about half the season, actually exactly half the season, but was a point per game player. Sure. Evan Rodriguez. Funny, all 3 of those Penguins are all 19, 20, and 21 on this list. Everyone's favorite, Niederreiter. He's number 18 on this list. 44 points in 75 games played. Paul Stastny, the former Wild Killer, age 36.
Still a Wild Killer, but
yeah, finishing in Winnipeg. Mason Marchment, by the way, 27 years of age, had a pretty good year with the Panthers. John Klingberg, the question mark is Jeff Petrie the answer for Dallas if they can't resign him?
Remember, Klingberg asked for a trade too, and we haven't really heard much since then. It's been pretty quiet over there in the Lone Star State. We'll have to see what develops from that.
Yeah. Can the Tampa Bay Lightning hang on to Andre Palat? 49 points in 77 games played, 31 years of age. Is he staying or is he going?
Oof. Tampa's got some cap issues next year. I mean, they've had some cap issues for a while, but
Shea Weber has entered the chat.
I know. Well, can't anymore. So unless they flip him, but yeah, that's going to be tough. That's going to be tough to keep him. And you kind of wonder also if there's anything I've noticed about Tampa's defensive, they're older and man, are they slow.
Yeah. Well, so am I, but you're still here.
This is true.
The
wheelchair is capped, so shut up.
Tampa Bay is going to be an interesting case, and this could be their last little kick at the can for a while. We'll have to see. Vinny Trocheck sits at 13th on this list, 51 points in 81 games played, a good little centerman that can also play wing for Carolina. A quietly underrated player in Valerie Nichushkin, both in the regular season and playoffs for Colorado.
Yikes, he's been unbelievable.
Yeah, and 52 points in 62 games, a .84 point per game clip. He's been good.
And to think that he was sort of the pariah when he was with Dallas, goes over, plays in Russia for a couple of years, comes on a very low risk, low reward contract to Colorado now, has been one of their better defensive forwards, and now also adding some offense at the most needed time. He's been their dark horse, and he's going to be looked at as one of the he won't win MVP, but he will definitely deserve a lot of praise for if Colorado is able to finish it off. He deserves a lot of accolades for the performance he's had in these playoffs for sure.
Yeah, he's been very good. Has 3 goals, I think, in the finals already. Now, I had 2 tonight. I think.
Yeah, he did. Yes,
he's looked really good. Number 11 on this list, not coming to Minnesota because apparently they aren't winners. Phil Kessel, 34 years of age.
We don't have enough hot dogs, whatever.
Yeah. Number 10 on this list, I think he's too pricey for the Wild, but out of all the guys on this list, I mean, there's a lot of guys that obviously would be a good fit. This is the guy I would love to see in a Minnesota Wild sweater. Andrew Kopp, 27 years of age, can play anywhere in the lineup. 72 contests for him, 53 points, 0.74 points per game. One of the better defensive, essentially two-way forwards, I would put him in that category, and centerman in the National Hockey League. He's a guy that I still think has flown so hard under the radar, as well as Ryan Strome at number 9. 1 more point for him and 2 more games played. Those are 2 guys that I think are attractive options. I haven't taken a look. So right before I kick it off to you, $12 million basically in cap space for the Rangers entering next year.
Yeah, I think the Rangers are going to make a hard push to keep Andrew Kopp because, again, with Kopp, over 20 goals this season. He's 6'1", 206. So he's got some size to him, something that the Wild, I think, still want to look at a little bit more. Was really good in the kid line against Philip Hedl and then Alex Lafreniere. So we'll see. I would love to get him. As I mentioned before, the Wild are not going to have enough cap space to get him, I don't think. I think he's going to be due a raise, and he was earning just a shade under $3.5 million a year. I just don't think it's going to be able to work out.
The question mark is him and Ryan Strome had identical seasons, just one more assist for Strome. Let's take a look at Strome here. His last contract that he just signed with the Rangers, if I can get it up here, he was making $4.5 million a season. And then Andrew Kopp, like you had just mentioned, $3.64 million AAV. How about that? Andrew Kopp was on a 1-year deal.
Yeah, kind of a show me contract almost, I think, right? So giving the Rangers some flexibility in the offseason. I think Kopp goes back. I'm not sure about Ryan Strome.
And that's what I was going to ask is, do you think that if one stays, the other one's going?
I think so. I do think so. I just don't think there's just enough room for him, unfortunately, unless they take a gigantic discount, which Kopp probably won't, but maybe Strome could. But Strome put up some good numbers too, so his agent will be barking that order over to the folks at MSG executive offices. So hard to say. I do think one stays, one goes for sure.
If the Minnesota Wild keep Marc-Andre Fleury, they should also go pick up David Perron at number 8 on this list, because that
Might
would
as
really
well.
that would really help things. Actually, 34 years of age, 57 points in 67 games, 0.85 points per game, had 27 goals and 30 apples in the regular season. It won't show me the playoff stats. I wonder if I can find those. But he was very good in the playoffs. I think he had whatever it was to finish like 14 points in 12 games or something. He's a guy
and a right-handed shot.
Yeah, he's a guy that maybe is due for maybe one more payday before his career kind of goes, or maybe kind of a front-loaded contract there, which is not up the Minnesota Wild's alley. But does St. Louis? Let's take a look at them. Why don't we? St. Louis have a projected $9 million in cap space, and they have only two UFAs, Tyler Bozak and David Perron in the front end. Scott Perunovich, Nico Mikola are RFAs, and Letty is a UFA, like you mentioned, as well as Ville Husso, who's been the target of the Toronto Maple Leafs as well as a lot of other teams, is a UFA for next year as well too. So $9 million, I'd say Ville Husso is definitely due for a raise, and that makes the question mark for David Perron a little bit more interesting. I think Tyler Bozak is gone, so
I think he is too. I think they loved Nick Letty on their back end too, to help solidify their back end, which may close the door on David Perron. We'll have to see what St. Louis does to kind of retool a little bit, because again, just the way they play into Craig Berube, they know the players that they need, and they all execute that game plan. It's actually kind of fun to watch, honestly, despite being a Minnesota Wild fan and having to be suffocated under that boa constrictor. David Perron would be amazing if you can get him at a good price, but I have a feeling with the numbers he put up, he could earn a contract very similar to the one he had, which is what, 3.4 million, I think is what he was getting. 3.4. Yeah. 3.4. Well, cap it a 4 million a season, actual salary paid 3.4 million. So, again, might be too expensive. Now, granted, he was on Vegas, had a really good run with Vegas. He seems to find success wherever he goes. I think the biggest question with him is, when does he just drop off? And maybe that opens the door where teams maybe pass on him a little bit, and maybe you can get him at a cheaper deal because of his age at 34. We'll see. I still think he skates well. I still think he plays the game very intelligently. He's got still a great lethal shot. And as a depth piece, Wild could use that.
Yeah. 27-year-old Andre Burakovsky sitting at 7th on this list with 61 points, had a pretty decent season on a very good Colorado squad.
Might be raising the cup, maybe.
Yeah, above him, 3 of the aging greats, 36, 34, 35, Patrice Bergeron, Claude Giroux, and Chris Letang sitting at 65, 65.
Well, Chris Letang is signed, so we can take that off.
Yeah, right. 68 points as well for Chris Letang. Don't know if he's going to be back in a Penn sweater. We'll have to see. But
well, didn't we just say that he was just a big deal?
No, he's top priority.
Oh,
they haven't signed anybody. No.
Okay.
So Letang, Giroux, and Bergeron. Does Bergeron continue to play hockey? 65 points in 73 games. You'd hope that he would.
He'll play.
Yeah, how about the fact that Claude Giroux, for all the flack he's gotten in Philly, quietly had 65 points in 75 games, and then 68 points in 78 for Chris Letang. The question mark is Pittsburgh, Florida, Boston. Are any of those guys not going to stay with their respective teams?
Oh, boy. I don't think Bergeron's going anywhere. I just can't see that. Yeah. I think the biggest moving piece might be Claude Giroux, honestly. Florida is a good team, at least as we see them now. I'm curious to see what their offseason moves might or may not be.
Of course, I did just interrupt you again. You mentioned Patrice Bergeron.
Should have a counter for that.
Yeah, well, it's a lot. The Bruins are in trouble here, Nick.
I told you.
What I'm
if
saying.
You look, we talked about it.
$2.3 million in projected cap space. They only have 3 UFAs on the forward side, and 1 UFA on the D side. Someone's got to go, or Patrice Bergeron's got to take a healthy pay cut, and his season does not warrant that.
Well, and the thing is, he's a face of the franchise. He's a 5-time Selke winner. That's some pedigree that I think they want to have around. And again, he was a major voice that, well, shall we say, at least from the conspiracy theory terms, led to the departure of Bruce Cassidy. So I think that there is a healthy relationship there. And again, as you mentioned, the numbers aren't favorable for both the Bruins and for Patrice Bergeron. So unless he takes essentially a league minimum salary, it's going to be tough to try to fill the rest of the roster out.
Like you mentioned, same with the Florida Panthers, just over $3 million in space for them. They've got 5 UFAs and an RFA on the front end, and on the back end, they've got 1 RFA and 3 UFAs. So yeah, Claude Giroux definitely could have. I mean, he was a deadline acquisition. He was a push for the cup.
He was a rental. Yeah. He was a push for the cup, and I think he has the respect amongst the NHL community, where I think he has earned the right to pick and choose where he wants to go. Depends on what is most attractive. Could he re-sign in Florida? Sure. But again, not a lot of room there. We'll see what he does, but I think that one probably amongst the 3 is to me the most dynamic player to be moved, just because of multiple different things. And I think, again, Claude Giroux has a little bit more of the, I really want to go try to win a cup somewhere, and we'll see. I think he's got the highest percentage to move.
Yeah. Top 3 guys on the UFA list sitting up there. Philip Forsberg for Nashville had 84 points in 69 games. Nazem Kadri, 87 points this season, and 115 points.
Holy cow.
For Johnny Gaudreau. You look at Nashville's situation, talking about Philip Forsberg, whatever you want to call him. He's pretty good at his position. I'll say that. Luke Cunnin and Yakov Trenin, who actually had a pretty decent who actually had a pretty decent little playoff, as well as another player or UFAs in the front end, Philip Forsberg, Nick Cousins as UFAs, and then Matthew Benning and Ben Harper UFAs, and David Riddick are UFAs for this Nashville squad that has $21.5 million in projected cap space. I would be hard pressed to not see Philip Forsberg back, though. I mean, really, I would say you got to get Forsberg and Luke Cunnin and Treinen probably.
Well, obviously Forsberg is number 1 priority. There's 42 goals for Philip Forsberg. He almost single-handedly willed that team into a postseason berth. They need a backup goaltender. Connor Ingram, I think, showed some good promise, but UC Saros getting injured at the absolute worst time for this Nashville squad. But yeah, and you got to wonder, Matt Duchene at age 31 did not have the greatest season by the numbers. Also, Ryan Johansson's really dived down too. I know he was getting a lot of flack as well for his performance.
Wait a minute. That doesn't sound right.
Ryan Johansson?
No, I think they both had really good years this year.
Didn't they?
Yeah, they had. Well, Matt Duchene had 43 goals and 43 assists.
So I'm thinking of maybe
maybe
their playoff. Oh, that was their playoff.
Yeah, and then Ryan Johansson had 26 goals and 37 assists. So he had an okay year, but Matt Duchene, I was saying Matt Duchene was like exceptional this year.
Okay,
so
I mean,
which complicates things because
it because if you go to the Nashville their roster breakdown, both Matt Duchene and Johansson are making 8 and 8 apiece. Then you have Mikael Granlund, who just signed an extension. You still got 3 more years left on a $5 million per year deal. Colton Sissons is there, Eli Toivonen, and then it's like, what else is left?
Yeah.
So they're very top heavy. And as they were just rapidly dismantled by Colorado in the first round. You got to wonder too what the GM is thinking down there after. Yeah. I mean, they're not even close to an elite club.
Yeah.
And you kind of want
re-signing their head coach for 2 years too, and
John Hines, that surprised me a bit.
You talked about what is really there. The question is what is really there for the Colorado Avalanche with Nazem Kadri second on this list, and they are gonna be losing people. There's no secret about that. 25.6 in projected cap space. But here's the thing: the year after next, Nathan McKinnon is due, as well as JT Compher, Alex Newhook, Lucas Sedlak in that year after next year, as well as Eric Johnson and Bowen Byram, who's an RFA. So that's not next year, but the year after. For this upcoming year, Nicholas Abe-Kubel and Arturi Lehkonen are both RFAs. Burakovsky, Caligiano, Darren Helm, Kadri, Valerie Nichushkin, and Nico Sturm are all UFAs. And then on the back end, Jack Johnson, Josh Manson, and Ryan Murray are UFAs, as well as Darcy Kemper. So
Yeah,
this core is not staying together.
No, and again, this has been a team that for the last, probably 3 seasons was looked at as this is a dangerous squad. They should be a cup contender. They fell short the last couple of years. This year, I think even the players understand this is our best shot to take one home to the city of Denver. And how about that? Denver could win the national championship for the NCAAs. A Denver area high school win the National High School Hockey Championship. And then you're going to have a triple crown of hockey championships if Denver's is able to pull out the Stanley Cup victory. So how about that, huh?
And then there's the Rockies and the Nuggets.
Who?
Seriously. Speaking of who, and feel free to touch on what the Avs are going to do, but the same boat I think applies to the Calgary Flames. And the reason I say who is because Johnny Gaudreau had the quietest 115-point season I've ever seen. Yeah. He, along with Calle Yarncroc, Trevor Lewis, Brett Ritchie, Ryan Carpenter, all UFAs. Matthew Tkachuk and Andrew Mangiapane are both RFAs, as well as Oliver Shillington. On the back end, Erica Branson, Michael Stone, and Nikita Zadorov, all UFAs for next season. So Colorado and Calgary, I mean, no.
Yeah, well, it's a bit easier for Colorado if you hoist a cup, because then it's like that's sort of the price you pay to win a cup. It's like, okay, we brought in a lot of these guys. Darren Helm was a depth piece to bring in. He's got Stanley Cup credentials. Nazem Kadri, I think, is if there's any the biggest surprise in terms of his production. Wow, was he good? They just might lose him just to greener pastures, because it's going to be a lot more green that people are going to be throwing at him. And then Johnny Gaudreau, does he stay in Calgary? Does he go back to the United States? Is he looking for a change? I don't know. The thing in Calgary is, I think the biggest piece in disappointment was Sean Monahan.
He's been plagued by injury, and it's just his hip injuries have never been the same. And the bigger question is, yes, $26 million in projected cap space, but you take care of Tkachuk, you take care of Gaudreau. Where does that leave you?
You kind of wonder if it's one or the other kind of a situation.
I would say if you get both of those two, the other name you're bringing back is probably Andrew Mangiapane, just because he was that good. I don't know. It's a tough situation for this squad. So, Nick, my final question for you on the show, the only RFA we're going to talk about here. You know how percentages work from 0% to 100%. What are the odds that Kevin Fiala is in a Minnesota Wild sweater next season?
0.
Okay, not even a okay.
0. Just because, and here's why I'm confident saying that. Now, mind you, I'll preface this because every Wild fan's going to think I'm just a freaking Wild hater. That's not the case. Bill Guerin.
You know who you sound like?
Who? Don't even get me going.
Anyway,
Bill Guerin and the front office have been talking about ad nauseum the plan, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like from the postseason presser to midway through the season when they were asked about it, that it sounds like from the moves they made even prior to the season, they were made to buy him another year, but they knew that at some point, meaning this year, they were not going to be able to afford him.
Yeah. And
I think that's it's not good you lose a player like that, a known commodity.
So going back to the Alex DeBrincat conversation, you're 0% confident, meaning you're 100% confident he's gone. Yep. Where does he end up?
Well, he's not ending up in the Western Conference. We'll play it that way. I think if you're looking at some teams that are looking for an offensive punch, you could always call Chuck Fletcher. But here's the problem. He's got no assets to give you back.
Yeah.
So that cupboard's empty.
And Kevin Fiala will get $12 million a year.
So good for him, right? Detroit could be one because they've got assets, including picks and prospects. You wonder if New Jersey, who have really underperformed the last couple of seasons, do they go out and make a big splash? Do the Islanders want to add depth behind Matthew Barzal? Just to name a few. It's interesting, right? There's definitely some leverage out east, which is great.
Yeah.
And you kind of hope, again, if you're the Wild fan base or if you're GM Bill Guerin, that you don't have a lot of these pieces like Kadri, like Gaudreau, that make it far into free agency, because you want to be able to effectively, have a bidding war for less supply, effectively. Yeah. And again, just like the DeBrincat situation, you're just hoping to get the best return, knowing that all or none are going to work out, but at least you can say you got something in return. And then again, you can flip it.
You mentioned Western Conference. There is one team that Minnesota has done dealings with in the past that maybe is a question mark. Actually has the most salary cap space of any team in the National Hockey League. That's actually the Anaheim Ducks.
It's not the Arizona Coyotes.
It is
bizarre.
It is not. Arizona's actually 4. So you got Anaheim, Detroit, Buffalo.
I don't think in this day and age with because Anaheim's got some good young players. They're still far and away from, I think, competing. But I don't think you want to give that team a boost either, because you could eventually face them in a playoff role. I think Bill Guerin will do whatever he can to make sure he goes across conference lines.
But I also think he'll do whatever he can to maximize the return, knowing you're going to lose an RFA. So, and you have a little bit of leverage knowing he's an RFA in some senses. So, sure. and wants to get him moved before someone offer sheets him, if possible. Correct. So, also New Jersey, mentioned Ottawa has space, but you know how they work. The Kraken have space. The Preds actually have an okay amount of space, but Philip Forsberg, Columbus as well. Throw LA in there, and that's kind of about it. So
I don't think you would send Fiala to Columbus, only because I can't see Fiala wanting to go to Columbus. Because I think, again, trying to maximize your return.
Yeah, he doesn't have I don't think he has a.
There's no trade clause. What I'm saying is you're trying to send him to a place he wants to go play to.
Well, yeah, but at the end of the day, Bill Guerin's going to do what has to be best for the Wild. Like that's,
I get that,
but
that in turn could be the best for the Wild, because if he's like, "Hey, New Jersey's called, you want to go?" and he's like, "Yeah, he's super excited to go." Yeah, that could get you a better return.
Yeah, just looking at the depth chart, I mean, there's not a whole lot of options that are exciting. I mean, Jack Roslovic, maybe Eric Robinson. It's
Roslovic would be a good center pickup, but I don't. But they just extended him, and I don't think Columbus would want to give away another center right now.
All right, so Philip Deneau from the Kings. Okay, sounds good, right?
Go. Perfect.
All right, I think that will do it for this episode of the Huskies Warming House podcast. A very lengthy one, but we are excited. We should be back next Sunday as well for a normal episode release for episode 117. Other than that, Nick, I don't think we have anything else, so we're going to bid it adieu. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Maverick!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.